From Mafia Cops to rapist police officers, here are top 10 cops who got exposed on camera. Number 1. Gerard John Schaefer. Schaefer was a teacher who was fired for inappropriate behavior. He became a patrolman in Martin County, Florida after being turned down for the priesthood. On July 21, 1972, while on patrol, Schaefer picked up two teenage girls who were hitchhiking. He took them to a secluded area in the woods and tied them to a tree. Schaefer got a call on his radio and he left them tied up, vowing to return. They escaped and went to the closest police station, which happened to be Schaefer's station. When Schaefer returned to where he left the girls, he discovered them missing. Realizing they were gone, he called his chief and explained that he had done something stupid. He claimed that he wanted to scare the girls so they wouldn't hitchhike. The chief didn't believe his story. He was arrested and charged with false imprisonment and assault. He posted bail, and on September 27, 1972, Schaefer abducted, tortured, and murdered 17-year-old Susan Place and 16-year-old Georgia Jessup. Their bodies were found 6 months later, and because of the similarity to Schaefer's other crime, police got a warrant for his house. There they found clues linking him to the disappearance of 30 other females, including jewelry and even teeth from the victims. He was convicted of first-degree murder in 1973 and given 2 life sentences. He was stabbed to death in prison by fellow inmate Vincent Rivera on December 3, 1995. Number 2. Antoinette Frank. Frank was a member of the New Orleans Police Department. As well as working for the NOPD, she also worked security detail at Kimon Restaurant. At the time, Frank had developed a strange relationship with 18-year-old Roger Lacazzi, a drug dealer with a history of violence. She took Lacazzi in her patrol car for ride-alongs and introduced him to people as her trainee. On March 4, 1995, Frank and Lacazzi robbed Kimon Restaurant. Frank fatally shot fellow officer Ronald Williams, whose second son was born a week before his death. He and Frank had shared the security duties at the restaurant. She then executed 2 members of the family who owned the restaurant, 17-year-old Quang Vu and his 24-year-old sister, Ha. Frank and Lacazzi escaped, but Frank returned to the scene of the crime a short time later as a police officer. Unbeknownst to Frank, witnesses were left alive in the restaurant. They identified her as the shooter. Both Frank and Lacazzi were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. This was first time a police officer was convicted of murdering another officer. A month after their conviction, a body was found buried in Frank's yard with a bullet through its skull. Her father went missing a year and a half earlier. Number 3. Mafia Cops. Eppolito and Caracappa. Louis Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa are 2 former New York Police Department police detectives who worked on behalf of the New York Mafia, principally the Lucchese crime family, while they committed various illegal activities. By 1985, U.S. authorities recognized Eppolito and Caracappa as associates and workers for the New York Mafia. Caracappa was at this point a member of the organized crime homicide unit within the Major Case Squad based in Brooklyn, New York, and both their reputations were diminished as they were known to use highly inappropriate methods to get results in their line of work. Anthony Casso, aka Gaspipe, was the underboss of the Lucchese New York Mafia when he tried for witness protection in 1994. Said he and his boss Vittorio Vicamuzzo had been paying Eppolito and Caracappa $375,000 in bribes and as payments for murder contracts since 1985, after they were signed as NYPD detectives and partners. Among other things, Casso shared that, in 1986, the 2 police officers kidnapped and turned over an associate of the Gambino crime family named James Hidell to be murdered brutally by Gaspipe on the orders of Casso and Amuzzo, as retaliation for an attempt on Casso's life. They also murdered Lucchese member Bruno Faxiola with assistance of Louis Dadone on the orders of Casso because they suspected him of being an informant for law enforcement. Faxiola's murder has been famous for the stuffed canary U.S. law enforcement recovered in his mouth at the crime scene, which was considered to be a message to other informants. In 2006, Eppolito and Caracappa were convicted of labor racketeering, extortion, narcotics, illegal gambling, obstruction of justice, 8 counts of murder and conspiracy to commit murder, charges stemming from the 1980s and the early 1990s in New York, and in the 2000s in Las Vegas. On March 6, 2009, Eppolito was sentenced to life plus 100 years and Caracappa received life plus 80 years. Each was fined more than $4 million. As parole has been abolished in the federal prison system, Eppolito and Caracappa will certainly die in prison. Number 4. John Burge. Burge was a detective and was later promoted to detective commander in Chicago's South Side, starting in 1972 and continuing until he was suspended in 1991. He was plagued by allegations of brutality. Burge and detectives under him known as the Midnight Crew were accused of torturing more than 200 suspects. They were accused of suffocating suspects by putting bags over their head and electrically shocking them. Burge was even accused of making a suspect play Russian roulette with a .44 caliber gun. One of the worst cases of brutality at the hands of Burge happened in 1982. After 2 police officers were murdered in Chicago, Burge and his men arrested Anthony Holmes before torturing him at the police station. They hooked him up to an electrical box and placed a bag over his head, repeatedly electrocuted his genitals, and he was forced against a hot radiator until forcing a false homicide confession from him. Holmes spent 30 years in prison for a murder that he did not commit because Burge tortured a confession out of him instead of tracking down the real killer. Due to these extreme measures to get confessions, numerous innocent men were imprisoned. 4 of these men waiting on death row were pardoned outright in 2000. And in 2003, all death row inmates were commuted to life without parole or less, with the Burge case being cited as the main reason. An investigation into Burge and the Midnight Crew began in 2002 and concluded in 2006. He was found guilty on all counts in 2010, and in 2011 he was sentenced to 4.5 years in federal prison. Number 5. William Leasure. Leasure was a traffic cop in Los Angeles for 17 years, yet he had millions of dollars in an offshore account and had a dozen Corvettes. It turns out, Leasure was actually running a criminal enterprise. He ran a stolen car ring, stole and resold luxury yachts, and organized murder for hire schemes. He arranged at least 3 murders and was the driver for 2 of them. The first was the murder of a 76-year-old Gilberto Cervantes who was shot returning home from church. Ann Smith was the second victim. Her crime was just that she divorced one of Leasure's friends. Leasure had his accomplice Dennis Franz shoot Smith in her mother's beauty salon whilst staging a fake robbery. Leasure's third victim, Tony de los Reyes, was also shot during a fake robbery. Leasure was arrested aboard a stolen yacht outside of Oakland on May 26, 1986. 5 years later, Leasure pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and was given a sentence of 15 years to life. Number 6. Stephanie Lazarus. In December 1985, John Rutan broke off his relationship with police officer Stephanie Lazarus and married a critical care nurse named Sherry Rasmussen. On February 24, 1986, Rasmussen was found beaten and shot to death. Her case was initially ruled a robbery gone wrong because her BMW was missing. While the case sat cold for 24 years, Stephanie Lazarus, a Los Angeles Police Department officer, was promoted to the rank of detective in charge of art and forgery. It was only in 2009 during a review of cold cases that Lazarus finally became a suspect in the Rasmussen case. An undercover officer tailed her, eventually collecting a DNA sample. It was compared to the DNA sample taken from a bite found on Rasmussen's body and it matched. Lazarus was convicted of first-degree murder in 2012 and sentenced to 27 years in prison. Number 7. Justin Volpe. On August 9, 1997, Volpe and other officers responded to a fight at a nightclub in East Flatbush in Brooklyn. Volpe arrested 30-year-old Abner Luma, a Haitian immigrant, after Luma allegedly punched him in the stomach. On the way to the police station, Luma was beaten with fists, nightsticks, and police radios. Once in the police station, the abuse continued. Volpe kicked Luma in the groin and then squeezed his testicles. In the washroom of the station, other officers held Luma down while Volpe sodomized him with a broken broomstick handle and a handle of a plunger before ramming it in his mouth so hard that it broke his teeth. Volpe then walked around with the bloody fecal-covered plunger claiming he took a man down. Luma was taken to the hospital and the police said his injuries were from abnormal homosexual sex. The hospital officials didn't believe the story and contacted Internal Affairs. Luma spent 2 months in the hospital and required 3 major surgeries. On December 13, 1999, Volpe was sentenced to 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole, a $525 fine and restitution in the amount of $277,495. Volpe admitted he made a mistake and stated that Luma was not actually the person who punched him. Number 8. Craig Peyer. Peyer was a California Highway Patrol officer who had a habit of directing young women onto an unfinished off-ramp to try to get dates. On December 27, 1986, Peyer pulled over 20-year-old Karen Knott. It is thought that Knott rejected his advances. Peyer beat her with his flashlight and then strangled her with a rope. After he murdered her, he threw her body off an abandoned bridge. 2 days later, a local television station was covering Knott's murder when a reporter interviewed Peyer about how to stay safe on the road from predators. During the interview, Peyer had visible scratches on his face. After the segment aired, a number of women called in to complain about Peyer's inappropriate advances. The police did an investigation and found a plethora of evidence against Peyer, including the murder weapon in his car. Witnesses also came forward who saw Knott being pulled over by a California Highway Patrol car, and fibers under Knott's fingernails were similar to those found on Peyer's body, going against the tradition of the Blue Wall of Silence. Other officers testified against Knott. He was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years to life in 1988. He has since been denied parole 3 times. Number 9. Daniel Holtzclaw. Daniel Ken Holtzclaw is a rapist and a former Oklahoma City Police Department police officer. He was convicted in December 2015 of multiple counts of rape, sexual battery, forcible oral sodomy, and other charges. The majority of Holtzclaw's victims had criminal histories such as drug arrests who he thought would never report what happened to police. All of the women were African American. Holtzclaw used his position as an officer to run background checks to find information that could be used to coerce sex. Holtzclaw was arrested 2 months later on August 21, 2014 and originally charged with 16, and eventually 36 counts of sexual abuse offenses including rape in the first and second degrees, sexual battery, procuring lewd exhibition, stalking, and forcible oral sodomy. Holtzclaw pleaded not guilty to all charges. One of 13 women brought together by the police investigators to testify, Shandy Griansada Hill, said she had been arrested for drug possession, was hospitalized, and forced to give oral sex while she was handcuffed to her hospital bed. She said that he again made sexual advances to her on several occasions after she was released from jail. Hill said that she was led to believe that she would be released if she performed oral sex on Holtzclaw. On December 10, 2015, an all-white jury convicted the former Oklahoma City cop on 18 of 36 charges, and on January 21, 2016 he was sentenced to 263 years in prison. Number 10. Luis Valenzuela and James Nichols. As these 2 narcotics officers in the LAPD's Hollywood division stalked the streets of Los Angeles, they allegedly targeted women they'd arrested for drug possession. Sometimes, they used them as confidential informants in their ongoing cases. Under threat of jail, they forced them into their unmarked undercover Volkswagen Jetta they drove on duty and took them to secluded areas where one of the officers forced some of the women to have sex and others to perform oral sex while his partner acted as a lookout. These disturbing crimes were brought to light starting in early 2010, when the first accuser came forward. She was an informant, threatened by the cops with jail time if she didn't comply with their sexual demands. Her case went nowhere, and the woman vanished. A similar account surfaced a year later. An internal investigation into the matter stalled for a year and a half, until in 2012, when a man called police to report a conversation with a prostitute. She said officers had been picking up her colleagues but agreeing to let them go without charges in exchange for oral sex. From this lead, 2 more victims were identified. By 2013, Luis and James were suspended without pay. They now face a dozen felony charges that could send both to prison for life. Multiple counts each of sexual assaults, including forcible rape, rape under color of authority, oral copulation under color of authority, and oral copulation by force. Luis also faces a charge of assault with a firearm. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.